Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday afternoon. My name is Courtney Peak. I'm the host of today's webinar. It's another round of our best practice series. Today, we're going to be focused all about the data set. Before we do get started, a little housekeeping. Everybody is on mute, but if you have any questions, go ahead and put those right excuse me, into the GoToWebinar control panel. We should have some time at the end to open that up and have a live Q&A session. We're also recording this session and we'll be putting it out on our YouTube channel, as well as sending it out to everybody about an hour after the webinar wraps for further playback. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. So again, today's focus is going to be all about the data set. Some of the main topics that we're going to be talking about is, of course, the explanation of the data set, the benefit of using the data set, how to customize it, how to add data sets to a form template, and also how to create data set connections to a PDF template, as well as much more. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Let me actually switch my screen over, and we're going to go right over to the PreciseFP dashboard here. Now, if you are following along and you are trying to access the data set, and if you do not see data set as an option, that does mean that unfortunately you do not have access to it. So only the company admin user has access to this data set. So if you are not the company admin user, you would not be able to access that. All right, so what is the data set? Well, the data set actually is something that comes preloaded when you actually sign up for PreciseFP. There's default elements out here that cannot be deleted due to the fact that they actually work with our integration partners. But the data set actually allows you to kind of customize what information is shown in the account profile. So we call clients and prospects in PreciseFP accounts. So kind of another way to think about it is to really kind of picture it as sort of a blueprint for every single client and prospect that you have. So any changes that you do here in the data set are going to reflect in every single person's, again, account, every single account's profile. So when you go to an account, like a client or a prospect in PreciseFP, and you go to their profile, this is the data set essentially. So the benefit of the data set. So what it does is it actually stores data in a client profile. A lot of this information, these data points here, work with the integration partners. So we've done the mapping for all of the integration partners. Well, a lot of the default fields that we have here in the data set. But another thing that you can do out here, and let's just kind of talk about the layout here of the actual data set real quickly, and then we'll dive into kind of, creating custom and things like that. So what we're looking at here is the data set. Along the right-hand side here, you've got the page sidebar. You've got the whatever page that you are clicked on, you'll see it as like a header right here. And then what you'll also see is you'll see the main content, which is all right here. This is the main content of this particular page. So it's very similar to a setup on like on a form template, and we'll get to that there. But again, along the right-hand side here, you've got the data set pages. So the data set is divided into pages, and each page can have several elements organized by groups. So this is a group, this is a group, and so on and so forth. So each page can actually collect data for an individual or for the entire household. Now, when collecting data for the individual, the actual page will be duplicated in accounts that have client and co-clients. So like your client details and the employment and income, these are actually set up at the individual level. A page can also have high or low security level. And based on this level, the contents of the page will then be available to actually be connected to template elements of the same or lower level. So let's say you wanted to maybe add a new page out here, and I actually have created some custom ones. So if you are looking at the default, you probably have everything from professional pages on up. Those are our default pages that we have out here. But on a previous demo, I had somebody ask me like, well, I want to have like this internal spot where I or my staff can plug in notes for our clients and prospects. And I explained to them, you know, that I think would be a really great thing to use the data set for. Because the data set, again, is for every single client and prospect profile, but you don't have to add the data sets to a template necessarily. So the notes is actually a great example of something that you may want to be on file for a client or a prospect, but not necessarily something that you want to send out to your clients and prospects, because I think a lot of times people mistake us for being a client portal that the clients are always going to have continuous access to, and that's not what PreciseFP is. PreciseFP is a data gathering solution, so the clients and prospects really only have access to PreciseFP when you engage them with a form. So a notes is a great example of maybe something that you want to have out here that's, you know, something that's internal for your client, for you and your staff to see, but not necessarily something that you would want your clients or prospects to see. So let me just go ahead. I'm actually just going to scrap this one out. I just want to kind of start from scratch to show you exactly how you can go out here and build out a new data set. So I'm actually going to delete this, this page entirely. So I'm going to show you right from the beginning how I did it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to click on where it says new page. You do have to give the page a title. So I think just to kind of stay on theme, I would call it notes. And as I was mentioning before, the page can collect data for an individual or for the entire household. So that is what this section is here. So it always defaults when you build a new page to be for the household at a high security level. So you can change that. Just keep in mind though that if you do build it at the individual level, it will duplicate over if there is a co-client on file. And I'll show you what that looks like when we go back to a client profile in just a moment. So I'm just going to kind of leave this at the defaults. So I created the page, but now I just kind of have this blank thing here, as you can see, which what happens is it actually just creates a blank group for you. So group is where you can add organization onto the page, really where you can lay elements down, because again, when we go back to like the client details page, this personal details group has all of this information in it, and then the contact details has all of, mine's a little custom, so it may not look exactly like yours. But this way, you know, if you happen to use these and you place this in front of the client on a form, it makes a little more sense for them. It's a little more organized. They can see exactly, you know, the header of this group and what all is involved in this group. So contact detail information. So in this case, what it did is it actually just laid down a blank group for me. So you can leave it to say untitled if you want, and it does disable the title and description. But if you wanted to actually just change that up, you can. And then you could enable that title and description. So now that header for the group is shown here. But now what you need to do is you just need to lay down an element, where an element is actually where you can input data into. So what I would recommend for something like a box of just free text, what I would lay down here in this example is actually a text area field. And I would just say, I don't know, you can just call it notes again if you wanted to, but maybe something like internal notes, something like that. And then you can bump up the number of rows of text that you want to allow in this particular text area box. And this is what it looks like in the data set. So as you're going along and you're building out here in the data set, it does auto save for you as you're going along, so you don't have to worry about continuously hitting a save button. It's just going to be there. So now if I go back to accounts, and if I go to a client or a prospect account and I go to that profile, I now have this notes section. So this is your point of view now, right? In the PreciseFP dashboard, this is your look and feel. This is not what the client is going to have access to. This is your dashboard of your client data and your status of your forms and your forms library, all of that. That's what you see. So that's what makes this nice, is the data set allows you to really customize the data that you have on file for a client. And even if you wanted to do something like with internal notes like this, you know, something that you wanted to just kind of keep track of on an individual client or prospect level, you know, you're not limited to just notes. You know, I have seen some advisors create like a whole like personal information kind of section where I don't know, maybe they ask the clients, you know, what their favorite beverage is, and it's in here in this profile. So then when you have a meeting with a client and they're coming in, you can go to this and you can say, oh yeah, they put that they like this specific coffee or something like that. And that way it's here, it's in PreciseFP, and you can see that. So this is again, just kind of giving you some ideas and just to kind of show you some of the different aspects of using this data set. And I think notes is definitely a great way to kind of utilize that. So just type something here. So again, this would be a notes section now on this particular client or prospect's profile. It will auto save as you're manually inputting here too. And then any client or prospect that you go to, again, that profile, you open that up and everybody's going to have that notes section. So I've seen a lot of advisors do that, kind of create like a notes section, and like I said too, kind of their own you know, custom fields that they may create. So going back to the data set, now I just kind of showed you one field that you can add out there, which is that text area field that I did. But as you can see, when you kind of place another element out here, there's a wide variety of different elements that you can place out here. So this, you're not limited to just the one I showed. I just wanted to show a quick example of that. Now, there's no limit to the number of pages that you can have in the data set. There's no limit to the number of elements that you can have either. It's just if you start to get a lot, just keep in mind that it would be a lot for the browser to render. So if you're noticing slow load times, after you're starting to get like 40, 50 pages out here, that's to be expected. I mean, that's a lot of loading for the browser to do, but there is no limit. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. But now, what you'll notice too is if you do go to any of our pre-made data sets that are out here, any of these pages and any of the fields, and you click on it and you click on edit, you know, there are certain fields, like this is a custom one that I built. So when I do click on it, I do have the little trash can icon. So to delete a data set, you do have to input your PreciseFP password, because once you delete it, it is unrecoverable. So you saw that that one can be deleted, but something like the first name field, when you click on it, you can't delete it. So if you're going around here and you're playing with the data set and you see a field that doesn't have the trash can icon, there's a reason for that. The reason that it can't be deleted is because it's hard coded into the integrations. So it cannot be deleted because it would cause errors. As a workaround, if you happen to have a field in the data set that you just will never use and you don't want to show up in a client profile, well, what you can do is you can actually click on it, click on the pencil icon, and you have this visibility right here. Just click on hidden, and then that makes it so that this field is no longer shown in any client or prospect's profile. So that's a little workaround for you, but otherwise the vast majority of these are not going to be able to be deleted. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind there. Okay, so another thing that we get kind of asked a lot in our support is, you know, somebody will come to us and say, well, I created this template and I had my client fill it out and I tried to export over to my CRM, but none of the information is going over. What's going on there? usually the issue is that you may have created what are called template elements instead of data set elements. So one thing to keep in mind, and I'm actually going to be doing a best practice webinar about the integrations, and this is going to be something that I talk about. But there are mapping tables for each one of the integration partners that you can check out in our knowledge base. And it will show you all of the fields from the data set that actually work with the integration. And what I always recommend is, if your goal is to have data push over to any of the integration partners, is to definitely start with our fact finders. All of our fact finders actually have the data sets on them already. And the purpose of that is because the mapping is already done with those fields, and it has the opportunity, if it's a bidirectional integration, to actually pre-populate with data, which is another benefit of using dataset fields on your form template. Because if you just lay down form template elements that don't have that connection to the client profile, they're not going to pre-populate with data, because they're not connected to anything to say, okay, this is a field that I'm connected to. Let's bring in data from this connected field into the form. There isn't that connection. So that's something that we do see a lot. So always recommend starting with one of our fact finders. You do not have to use them as is, which is definitely something we pride ourselves on, as being a fully customizable solution. So even though, and I'm just going to pick on this fact finder here, I'm actually just going to install a brand new version of it. So even though we have a load of pre-built forms out here, you can certainly come out here and customize these in any way, shape, or form. And I'm going to show you a little bit into the editor what I mean about having data set fields on your template and then form template fields too. So when we go and we customize this form template, so this is one of the form templates that I pulled from the library, I installed it, and now I'm going out here and I'm customizing it. So you can tell you're in a form template because you're actually on templates, and then you're under my templates, and then it will always tell you right here if you're in the template editor. Whereas if you're in the data set, you have to click on settings, and then you have to go to data set. So you'll always see this data set highlighted there. So I get that sometimes with people. They ask, well, I don't know where I'm at. Just look at where you're at on the sidebar here, and it will be highlighted with where you're at. So in this case, you can see I'm at templates, my templates, but now what I want to do is actually want to click on my template and then click on customize. So now I can see I'm actually in the template editor for my template called Financial Fact Finder. So we have it, if you look, it's very similar to kind of the layout in the data set, right? We wanted to have kind of that same look and feel when you're in different aspects of the actual data set as well as the form template. So you've got the pages along the right-hand side. You click on a page, you'll see, again, the header of the page right here. You'll see the group. Here's a group, and then the individual fields within it. Now, something to keep an eye on when you're looking at your form template here, and a good indicator of knowing whether an element is connected to the data set or not, is you'll see this little icon in the upper right-hand corner of these elements. This means that this has a connection to some location in the data set. So let's go ahead and click on a field here. Let's click on the first name field, and we'll click on the edit icon here. And we'll see that this is actually made a connection to the client details page, the personal details group, and the first name field from the dropdown. So this dropdown is actually meaning that it's connecting to the data set. And because of the fact that this is set up as, and this is all default, folks, so you don't have to worry about customizing any of this here. This is just to kind of explain the terminology and what this means. So the load and save, what that actually means here is that if the client inputs data here in their first name field, when you send this form out to them, it's going to save the information and it's going to move that to the client profile. And the loading aspect of that means that if you have data already on file in this first name field in their profile, and you send this form out to them, then their first name is actually going to pre-fill out here. So that is how these pre-made fact finders already work and how they work with the actual dataset connections. Now, let's say, for example, here, I want to go out here and maybe create a new element on this template. You can certainly do that. That is something you're more than welcome to do. So I'm just going to create a new element here. Maybe I'll just call it favorite beverage, just to create something so you can kind of see. As you can see on this element that I just created on here, it doesn't have that icon up there. So what does that mean when I send this out to my client? Well, my client isn't going to see these little icons. What that does mean, though, is that there is going to be no data loaded in here. And this means that if I send this form to my client, they put their favorite beverage there, and let's say a year later, I go and I engage them with this same form. Well, because this isn't connected to a data set, there's nothing that's going to pre-fill out there. So the data essentially from this form in this particular field is just going to stay in the form. It's not going to move to that client profile. Whereas all of this data that has this connection on it will. This data will move into the client profile. So what we recommend is if you are wanting data to store to a client profile, let's say you want to do a lot of customizing, what we always recommend, actually coming out here and building your data sets, getting those all done, getting everything done in the data set that you want. And then what you can do is you can actually come out here into your template and then you can pull in your data sets. So like, for example, going back into this fact finder, I don't have the professionals page out here, but that is a page in our data set that I can actually bring into the form here. So I'm going to click on new page and I'm going to choose import from, and I'm going to choose the data set. And now this is going to show me all of the pages from my data set that I have that I can actually add to this template. Now, another thing to keep in mind too is that only a high security level template can actually have data set pages on them. So I'm going to click on that professionals page here, and I'm going to click on that, and then as you can see, it brings in that page. This is from the data set, so it has all of those connections on it. So let's go ahead and test this out so you can see exactly what I mean. So I'm going to just rename this, just so I know, because I've got a couple of fact finders installed. So I want to make sure I use the right one. So I'm going to go to one of my clients here, and I'm going to go to their profile, and I want to show you because you'll see in their profile, I've got some of this information already on file for them, right? So what happens is when I go and I engage them with my form, which I'm going to do here, and I'm going to choose my form that I just created, I'm going to review it just so we can take a look at it. So what happens is that information, because I use data sets on this, and because I have data on file already in my client profile that has that connection. Remember that connection that I showed you on the form? So like for first name, we saw her name, it's already there in her profile. So then when she actually gets this form, so when my client gets this form from me, she's going to see this form actually pre-populated with data. So once this is done loading here, you'll be able to see exactly that. So you're going to be able to see this form filled out. I'm sorry it's taken so long here. It goes so slow when I've got GoToWebinar going. There we go. So here's what the client would see. So they see all of this information that's on file, right? That's coming pre-filled in onto their fact finder, which is fantastic because it makes less work for your client. They appreciate the fact that they don't have to fill out this information again, which I can say, you know, a lot of times we have a lot of firms and advisors who use PreciseFP with existing clients. A great example is review time. So what they'll do is they'll import data in from their CRM or financial planning software into PreciseFP, and the data stores in the client profile. And then they'll send something like the fact finder out, right? And then all of this information is already pre-populated, and that will happen for you folks automatically. All of this information will be pre-filled out into the form. So the client can really just, go through here and review the information that's on file, but they can also make changes and updates to it. Now let's go back to that favorite beverage field. Remember, I created that as a form template, a form template element, so it didn't have any connection. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put something here as if I'm the client, okay? I'm acting as if I'm the client now. So the clients, when they fill out the form, it auto saves for them too. So they can go along and they don't have to continuously hit a save button too. But just to move things along here, I'm actually just going to close this so we can just kind of move right back to the profile here. So let me just do a refresh in my system and I'm going to show you. So I'm going to go to my, my client's account and I'm going to go to their profile. So remember, I created that favorite beverage field in that personal details group on their form template. But because I didn't create that as a data set, it's not moving from the form, which if I go to engagements and all engagements, I can actually, we call the forms engagements here in PreciseFP, but if I go to the actual form and I pull it up, I can see that piece of data that my client input data into. I'll be able to see it on the form, but it's not going to move to the profile because I did not create it as a data set. It did not have that connection on it from the form template to a spot in the client profile, which is why we are only seeing this field in the form template and not in the client profile. Well, how do you fix that? Well, you can go the reverse way. So if you do create form elements and you want to create those as data sets, that can be done. It's just, unfortunately, you're going to make a lot more work for yourself if you do that, but it can be done, and I'll show you how to do that here in this example. So my recommendation and our recommendation here at PreciseFP is when you're wanting to build up the data set, get everything done in the data set at once. And then it's much easier to bring everything in from the data set into your form template versus having to go the reverse. However, again, what I'm going to show you is how to do the reverse. So again, remember, I created on my form template here a field called favorite beverage. What I'm going to do, because I also want that to store in the profile, is I am going to go to the data set and I'm going to go to that client details page under personal details here, and I'm just going to create a field. Now, if you don't see an empty cell to drop a field into, you can actually select any pre-existing elements that is here, and you can add a row below if you want, or you can drop a new row, or excuse me, a new element over to the right of it, which I'm going to do here. I'm actually going to do new element, and it has to be the same type of element that you added on your form template. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make a match. So in this case, it was a text field that I created on my form template. So I am going to create a text field here in my data set called favorite beverage, and then just click on create. So now what I have to do is I have to now go back to my template, click on it, click on customize, locate that field, click on the pencil icon, and in that connection, what I'm going to do is, and you could just do a search, and there's my favorite beverage field. And now it has that connection. Now this doesn't fix any past templates that were done. So going forward though, if you do make that connection, then it would save to the profile. So again, things to remember, you'll want to make sure it's the same type and it's in the same section and page and all of that. So again, best practice, I can't say this enough, is to get everything done in the data set, because as you saw, especially if you're starting to do like full entire pages, it's so much easier to come out here and just bring in an entire page from the data set, because if you do the reverse, you can't bring in pages from a template to the data set, but you can bring in pages from the data set into your form template. So just keep that in mind. Definitely do everything. If you want it stored in the client profile, you'll have to actually do that in the data set. And we do recommend doing that in the data set first. So now what happens is when I go to actually send this out to someone, so let me send this out to my client again, but again, I'm sending this out to them, and the first time that they filled that out, remember, it wasn't connected, right? So when they go to actually do the form again, so I'm going to send the same form to my client again. This is where, again, the benefit of using the data set comes in handy, especially if you are wanting to send your client a form that's pre-filled out with data that they may have already provided to you. This is where the data set's going to come in handy. So remember that favorite beverage field that I created on my past form didn't have a connection. So now it will. So now when I send this out, and now if my client puts something into that favorite beverage field, what will happen is, well, as you can see, this time it will not pre-populate with data. But if I put something here as the client, right? So the client input their favorite beverage, and again, I'm just gonna fast forward and close this here. Let me do a refresh. So now that we've created that as a data set, let's go back to that client profile now. And let's take a look at again, the client details, and we are on the personal details, and what do you know? There's our favorite beverage field, and it is saved with the data that they input on that form. Now, an example of a form that is not connected to the data set, we get asked this often too, is the risk tolerance questionnaire. You know, this actually is something that is considered to be a low security, so it doesn't require the client to authenticate to fill this out. So the reason behind us not making these questions data set fields, the reason behind that is because we didn't want this to be pre-filled out every time you sent it, because we have a lot of advisors who actually send this out yearly. Because, you know, some folks, their appetite for risk may change from year to year. So we didn't want them to be influenced by their previous selections that they've made out here, right? So that would be a good example of something that's not tied to the data set and the reasoning behind that. So it's not to say that every survey or every form that you create necessarily needs to be in the data set. I would say something like this, or, you know, maybe a survey like another one. A great example of one that's not tied to the data set is the satisfaction survey. So this is something that, you know, you can just send off to them. You don't have to worry about maybe sending it more than once. And if you do, you know, again, something you don't want them to be influenced by their previous, you know, answers, things like that. So I think it's just a matter of kind of thinking about your process when you're coming out here and kind of building your templates. You know, especially if you're going to be kind of branching away from what we have in the library, which is perfectly fine. You want to ask yourself, you know, do you want to maybe use this form with your client again? And if so, do you ever foresee it being something that would be beneficial to be, you know, pre-populated with data? Well, if you answered yes, then it may be something that you'd want to create as a data set and then just kind of build the form off of your data set pages. So that's something to kind of think about when you're going out there and, again, building out your form templates. Now, another thing is with the low security level templates, this is something that we get asked often too. So I'm going to show you here. I'm actually just going to build a brand new form. And I am just going to make it low security, because something that I wanted to show you here, let me just create this. Okay. And I'm going to create this as low security. Now, what you can do with a low security form is, I'll show you here. You can go out here and you can click on the plus sign when you're adding a new element, and you can import from the data set. I know, very confusing because I said you can't use data sets on a low security template. Well, these are the exception to the rule. These are the exception to the rule when it comes to a low security level form template. It is just basic like contact information, so name, genders one, birth date, email, mobile number, the risk tolerance score. Those are things that you can put out here. Now, even though these are data set elements, because it's a low security level template and you add like the first name and you add the last name and you may have that information on file for the client, that's not going to pre-fill out on a low security level form. The reasoning behind that is because with a low security level form, this actually does not require the recipient to authenticate him or herself. So that is a big security no-no in pre-filling out the form, regardless of it being sensitive or not. It's a big security no-no to have it pre-filled out with data. Especially because we can tend to, handle sensitive information. So we did not want to run the risk of any sensitive data being able to pre-populate. So you may be thinking, well, what is the benefit then of, having a low security level form that has, just these fields on it? Well, yeah, it doesn't pre-fill out with data. But this is a great example of what I've seen advisors use like for a lead gen. So with a lead gen form, and what we require for creating an account in PreciseFP is actually first name, last name, and email address. If you create a low security level form and you don't have these 3 fields on it, the submission is actually going to show as anonymous from wherever that person's location is. So if you have a low security level template, you can add these pre-made data set identification fields. Again, it wouldn't pre-fill out if you engage somebody that already exists in PreciseFP with this information, because again, it's a low security, doesn't require the authentication. But the really cool thing is, and I'm going to show you here in just a moment, is let's say you're using this as lead gen, which I've got a lot of firms who do use PreciseFP for that, and I'm going to show you an example here. This advisor uses PreciseFP as a lead gen solution. She's been very successful over the years of using us as such. She has this form as low security, and as you can see, she's got kind of those basic fields out here. So what happens is when someone comes out here and they complete that form for her off of her website, they are automatically created as a prospect for her in PreciseFP. So even though she's just gathering this basic information, so these are all data set fields that she's using here, it will never pre-fill out. As you can see, it's blank. So even if somebody's already in PreciseFP, this is something to kind of avoid. What I would recommend is if you need somebody to fill out your low security level form and they're already in PreciseFP, we recommend engaging them with it out of PreciseFP, because if you have a web published like this and they already exist in PreciseFP, it's going to create duplicates and you can't merge duplicates. So in this case, this is a great kind of functionality of the low security level forms and having kind of those basic identification data set fields on your form, because it all ties into the data set and creating that person as a prospect for you. And in this case, I see she's got their mobile number on there as well and home address. So what happens is somebody goes out there, they fill out her form, and now, well, she'll get an email alert, but she's using the first name, the last name, the email address, and the mailing address field. So those would actually pre-fill into this, into the profile for her prospect. And if you use those fields again, so in her case, she actually has another form that she sends out. She also uses that as sort of like a qualifier, if you will. So she's got another form that goes out. I think it's sort of like a fact finder, but it's her own custom take on it. but those fields are on that form. So she has the first name, the last name, the email address, the mobile number, and the mailing address on her next form. And then she sends it out to them, it pre-fills out. So that's again, the benefit of using the data set, and again, the impact of using it on a high security versus a low security level form. Hopefully that made sense, but if it doesn't, definitely drop me a question and we can go ahead and go over that again. Now, another thing that I wanted to show real quickly back into the data set is if you're trying to copy in from the data set. So if you're trying to copy in from this data set into like a form template, something, and I think I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to kind of reiterate that and expand on that a little more, is you'll want to make sure that the group type and the page type match. So page type, again, with client details is set at the individual level, whereas like family members is set at the household level. And then the group, so let me actually use employment and income as a great example of this. So the employment and income page is set at the individual level. And then this employment group right here, you can actually see this has multiple boxes there, whereas we go back to client details and the personal details group, it does not. This means that this group actually can have multiple rows, aka the add more button is actually enabled on this particular group. So how does that look and work in the form template? Well, when we go back to my templates, and let me go into that fact finder that I was working on earlier. So the employment and income page here, again, this employment group has an add more button on it. So let's just do a quick preview of this. So that means that the client, when they get this form from me, then if they've got, 2 or 3 employers, that means that they can actually click on that add more button here, and it duplicates everything in that group all over again. So as you can see here, now they can go out here and they can add employer 1 and add employer 2. So when you're trying on your form template, if you created, like for example, if I wanted to go to the family members page here, the family members page is not a page that's set at the individual level, it's set at the household level. So like if I wanted to come down here and bring in a group from the data set, I would have to have the page be exactly like how I have it in the data set, right? So I would have to have, and this goes when you're trying to connect something from like this group here. If I go into the element and I'm trying to connect it, right, to a group that I have in the data set. So let's say this group is actually a group here, this other information is a group that does not have the add more button on it, whereas this one is, right? So let's say with this, let me just create a new field here just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So let's say I created this and I wanted to connect this. Well, I'm only going to be able to connect this to groups from the data set that are on a household type page and that are part of a group that does not have an add more button on it. So that's something that we get asked often too, as they're like, well, I created this field in my data set. And this is just like if you're trying to do like a one-off. I created this field in my data set. I'm trying to connect this form template field to the data set, but it's not coming up in my search. The reason for that, again, is because it's not like for like. It has to match exactly. So it has to be in the same group type. So again, either with the add more button or without, and the page type has to match as well. So in this case, I would only be able to match this element here to a group that does not have, to an element within a group that does not have an add more button on it, and from a page that is a household type page. So that's something to kind of keep in mind too. Another thing that you can do in the data set too is you can actually rearrange these pages. So if you maybe wanted them in a different order, like if I wanted my notes at the top, it's just a matter of just kind of clicking, dragging, and dropping them. You can also actually rearrange your groups on the page too. So if you, like this group that I have here on this page, excuse me, any group that you have, you just hover over it, and you'll see this little arrangement of dots appear on the left-hand side. So if you click, you just need to click, drag, and then drop that, and then you can place that and kind of change up the order of the pages on the group as well. All right, so I saw a lot of questions come in. So I am going to stop there, and I'm going to go through these questions. So let's see. First one is, how do you connect a field on one page of a template to a field on a different page on the data set? So that's just kind of going what I just went through here. When we go back to the form template, it's just a matter of matching. You have to have it matched. And it has to be a high security level template. That's another thing to keep in mind too. So going back to my example here of where oops, this is my other one that I made, sorry. But let's say I create a field here, and I'll just call this something real quick. All right, so now I have this field. What I have to do is, if I want to connect this to something in the data set, I have to connect it to a data set element that is in a group that does not have the Add More button enabled on it, and has to be from a page that is at the individual level. So if you're doing a search when you're trying to connect and you're not seeing your element, definitely check to make sure it's like for like. All right, when you customize a template and add a new page from another existing template, does it automatically pull over? Oh, yes, this is a great question. Sorry, got excited there. When you customize a template and add a new page from another existing template, does it automatically pull over the connection to the data set it was already there on the template you took it from, or do you have to connect it in the new template you added it to as well? Great question. So if you're pulling in a new page and you import from another template, and it's another template that is high security, and it contains a page that has data set elements on it, I will show you here. It will keep the connections of the fields that are connected. Where you start running into problems is if you're, let's go back to my templates here, and if I go to like this low security level template that I added, if I try to go to a new page and bring in a page from a template that is high security, which you can tell here it is high security, the little green shield. This is one that's a low security here. It will bring in the page, but you will not have those connections, as you can see. So in this case, and that is the reason for that is because it's a low security. So as long as you're bringing over the page from another template that's a high security into an existing high security, yes, it will keep those connections for you. Somebody asked, how do these forms work with client and co-clients? So with our pre-made client details and our employment and income, let me just drag that back here. With our pre-made client details and our pre-made employment and income, these are set up to capture data at the client level. So what does that look like for the client? Well, when I actually send this out to them, if I have in the account for my clients, both clients and co-client, then the information basically splits that page for both of them. And I'll show you what that looks like here. Let me go back to their one that they completed here. Bear with me a second. So I'll show you here what happens is there will be a personal details page for the client. And there will be a personal details section for the co-client. Same with the employment page, right? Because more than likely they don't have the same job. So we want it to be broken up so that there's individual information for, in this case, the client. And then down here, we've got this, again, the page duplicates over again for the co-client. When you're previewing these forms, like if you're in the editor and you do a preview, obviously it's not going to say their names because you're just kind of working a preview. It'll say client name here. So that's something to kind of keep in mind too. But when you, let me show you here. Let me look at this form in preview so you can see what I'm talking about. So basically, if you send this to somebody that you don't have their spouse, partner, significant other on file yet in PreciseFP, what happens is those pages here set at the individual level, it'll have this add co-client button at the bottom. And then they would just click on this and then basically they can input information for the co-client here. So with the fact finders, we recommend only engaging one of them and have them be the dedicated person to input information for basically everybody. As you can see here, the page duplicated. So everything from the page duplicated over. So now this is for the co-client. Again, their names would populate here. This is just in the preview, so you can kind of see the placeholders there. And then the add more buttons, I saw somebody ask about those. Where do we find that add more button? It'll actually be on the form for the clients. So if the group is set to have the add more button enabled, it will look like this. It'll say add more, and then the client clicks on add more. And then what happens is that group is going to duplicate over and create another row. So in this case, they can put employer 1, here they can put employer 2. The children is another great example of a group that has the add more button on it. So they can add as many children as they have out here on the form. So that is set at the group level, the add more button. So if you're doing it in the data set, you'll actually just set that at the group level when you are creating the group. So going back to that notes one that I created, if I wanted to have the add more button enabled on this, I would actually just come out here and edit the group, and then I can choose to enable it. Now the add more button is not going to show here in the actual data set. That's only going to show in the profile and the actual form template. But you can tell when it's a group that has an add more button enabled on it because it will have this little icon here. So hopefully that answered your question there. Let's see. Also, what if on a survey, a client doesn't want to fill out their name? Can they leave that part blank? So with surveys, what I recommend is you can definitely create a form template that does not have the first name and last name field on it. What I would just recommend though is I wouldn't recommend publishing that on the website like this advisor did. I would create your survey. You know, you don't have to create a name field on it. You don't have to do that, but just send it out to them when they're already in PreciseFP. The reason you want to go that route is because that will tie it directly to their account. Whereas if you were to web publish it like this advisor did and didn't have the first name and field and all of that, they're going to come in as anonymous and then you're never going to know who submitted it. So in that case, yeah, you can create a survey. Don't lay down the first name fields or email fields or anything like that. And then just go to accounts and engage them right here. And that way, again, you know that this person, you sent them that specific form and it will come back into their account, even though it doesn't have the first name field on it. Let's see, somebody asked, I'm not clear on the differences in synchronization choices of load and save, load only and save only. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the fact finders, you don't have to worry because those are already set up to be load and save. So what load and save means is if you have a field that is connected to the data set and it's load and save, that means that if there's data on file in the profile to that connection, it's going to load into that field and pre-fill it out. So that's what load means. Save means that it's simply just going to take that data and save it to the profile. It is not going to load it. I hope that makes sense. So take, for example, the risk tolerance score. That is a field that's part of the data set, and we have that as save only. That's kind of going back to that that scenario of, maybe there's a situation where you don't necessarily want the data to pre-fill out into the form, but you want it to store to the profile. That's a great example of that. So it would store to the profile. So the risk score, they take the risk tolerance questionnaire, their score would populate on the risk tolerance questionnaire, and then it would save into the actual profile. That's save only, meaning it just saves it from the actual form to the profile. Load means it's going to load data from the actual profile into the form template. I hope that made sense. But that is the difference between load and save when you've got that synchronization choices there. But I do not recommend changing those on any of the fact finders, because the fact finders really are powerful and really can be used not only for, with new clients, but they can also be used with existing clients. Like I was kind of given that example before of where I personally have seen advisors using PreciseFP with existing clients. Great example, review time. So what you can do is, and again, I'm going to touch on this when I do my integrations webinar, but you've got somebody that you're ready to do a review in, we would recommend importing them in from your CRM or financial planning software beforehand, because that brings in really their most recent snapshot of data. And because those fields are set to load and save, it brings the data that's on file for them into the form template, presents it on the form template when it goes out to the client. The client can go through, review that form, they can make changes on the form, and then they could submit it back to you. And because it's got the load and save, what happens is if they make changes to that, that is automatically logged and tracked in the profile. So we highlight the profile for you to let you know exactly what changes the client did. So that's another benefit of kind of keeping those fact finders as is and using the data set, because we highlight to let you know, hey, they made some modifications here, or maybe they added brand new data. So this is an example of an update that my client did. Remember, we used that fact finder, we added this out here, my client input data. So now I, as the advisor, can review this profile before I export this back over to my CRM and financial planning software. I can see exactly what my client did, if anything, before I then push it back over into my CRM. So hopefully that made sense. I'm looking at the time. I don't see any more questions that have come through, so we will go ahead and wrap the webinar here. I want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join me today. We do have a lot of resources out there for you guys. Our YouTube channel is definitely one I highly recommend if you haven't been out there. I put tons of videos out there about PreciseFP. I've got our website. You can also reach us via live chat. Just click on the green chat icon in the lower right-hand corner. Myself, my staff, we're there Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time. Always happy to help. And all right, folks, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Let us know if any other questions come up, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.